Okay, 2 Kings chapter 15. As far as the timeline is concerned, we're going to kind of jump ahead a little bit in chapter 15. As you know, we started 2 Kings, went up through the timeline, and then about chapter 11 went back, kind of retold some of those stories again, but from a different perspective of some of the other things that happened. So you kind of have to, just realize we did that kind of jump. Now we're back up. We're kind of caught back up again. We're going to kind of go forward ahead a little bit to some other things. So this is going to jump us probably 50 or 60 years ahead of in time, basically with what's happening in Israel and in Judah. So verse 1, in the 27th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, began Azariah, son of Amaziah, king of Judah, to reign. So we're starting kind of back a little bit, and then we're going to jump forward. Now, verse 2, 16 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 52 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Jecholiah of Jerusalem. Remember, this what we mentioned this 2 chapters ago. Verse 3, and he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father Amaziah had done. So he actually followed Amaziah's his reign, basically, and did some decent stuff. Now, there was more detail this about two chapters ago, I believe in chapter 13 of 2 Kings. You can go look that up to get some more details on it. Verse 4, save that the high places were not removed. Remember, we mentioned that. The people sacrificed and burnt incense still on the high places. So there's still Baal worship, Ashtaroth worship, still idol worship there, but they've also tried to reestablish the temple and the real religion, basically. Verse 5, and the Lord smote the king so that he was a leper unto the day of his death, and dwelt in a several house or separate house. So he becomes a leper, so he can't stay in the main palace, he has to stay in a separate house, but he's still there, basically. And Jotham, the king's son, was over the house, judging the people of the land. So his son Jotham took over, because as a leper, he couldn't interact with the people and do stuff. So Jotham kind of took over. So the king was alive and technically had the authority, but Jotham was the one running everything, basically. Verse 6, the rest of the acts of Azariah and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? So I want those. Hopefully we find those books sometime soon. If you've heard about these books being found, put a link in the comments. I'd love to get more, because apparently there's a lot more in there that we would love to get. And this is not the Chronicles books we have in the Old Testament. This is a separate book of history that we don't have. They haven't found it yet in archaeological research, at least that I know of. Verse 7, so Azariah slept with his fathers, and they buried him with his fathers in the city of David. And Jotham his son reigned in his stead. In the 38th year of Azariah, king of Judah, did Zechariah the son of Jeroboam reign over Israel in Samaria 6 months. So remember, in the end of last chapter, Zechariah became king. He had been there 6 months when Amaziah died, and his son Jotham became king of Judah. So you have to understand, are we talking about Israel or Judah? There's 2 kingdoms, so that it's easy to get confused between those 2. Verse 9, he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, as his fathers had done. He departed not from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. So this is Zechariah. Remember, he followed the same paths of idol worship, seeking power, consolidating power to himself, those kinds of things. He kept status quo going in Israel, basically. That's what they've had for centuries. Verse 10, and Shallum, the son of Jabesh, conspired against him, and smote him before the people, and slew him, and reigned in his stead. So Shallum comes up and takes over, basically. Verse 11, the rest of the acts of Zechariah, behold, they're not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel. This was the word of the Lord, which he spake unto Jehu, saying, thy sons shall sit on the throne of Israel unto the 4th generation. And so it came to pass. Now, this is a story that we covered and went over several chapters ago when Jehu was brought in. Remember, Jehu was anointed as the king, and then because Ahab and Jezebel, remember, they had committed wickedness. Ahab was wounded, and Jehu is anointed king, and then he wipes out basically Ahab's family. All that happened several chapters ago, so we're just getting little snippets. So we haven't quite, this chapter by the end is going to push us into the future, but we haven't quite caught there yet. They're giving us a few of these little details of stories we've already talked about, basically. Now, verse 13, Shallum, the son of Jabesh, began to reign in the 39th year of Uzziah, king of Judah, and he reigned a full month in Samaria. So this is after Jehu. So, verse 14, for Menahem, the son of Gadi, went up from Tirzah and came to Samaria and smote Shallum, the son of Jabesh, in Samaria and slew him and reigned in his stead. So remember, Shallum basically did a coup, killed the king, became the ruler. Now, Menahem killed King Shallum in a coup as well. So this is this problem that we have. And reigned in Samaria. Samaria was where the king of Israel reigned, not Judah. Judah was from Jerusalem. Samaria was king of Israel. Verse 15, the rest of the acts of Shallum and his conspiracy which he made, behold, are they written in the books of the Chronicles of Kings of Israel? Verse 16, then Menahem smote Tibsah and all that were therein, and the coasts thereof from Tirzah, because they opened not to him, therefore he smote it, and all the women therein that were with child he ripped up. So these are some cities that he destroyed because basically they wouldn't support him or help him or work with him. They wouldn't open to him. They were afraid of him, and so he just sieged them and laid waste to the cities and destroyed them. And it doesn't sound like he was very nice to any woman who was pregnant, basically. That just sounds bad. That's just not a good situation. Verse 17, in the 39th year of Azariah, king of Judah, began Menahem, son of Gadi, to reign over Israel, and reigned 10 years in Samaria. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. He departed not all his days from the sins of Jeroboam, the sons of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. So again, Azariah, both kings have gone bad, basically. 19, and Pul, the king of Assyria, came against the land. And Menahem gave Pul 1,000 talents of silver, that his hand might be with him to confirm the kingdom in his hand. So Menahem's working a deal with Assyria. We're now talking about Assyria, not Syria, Assyria. Those are two different nations. But this is why I've been mentioning the kingdom of Assyria, okay? Now, it's interesting when you look at this, Pul isn't necessarily a super recognized name. There is in the history of Assyria. If you look at it, we talked about Ashur-Nazir-Pal II ruled, and then Tiglath-Pileser III ruled after him. There's a gap between those two, that maybe there were some smaller kings or some other things that were happening as well with that. So that could be where Pul comes in. He's one of these little in-between rulers of Assyria, basically, in between these great rulers. Now, verse 20, and Menahem exacted the money of Israel, even of all the mighty men of wealth, each man 50 shekels of silver, to give to the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria turned back and stayed not there in the land. So Israel bought Assyria off, basically. We'll pay you to not come destroy us, basically. So they bought themselves some time, because Assyria is, they have a very different way of fighting and doing things that gave them a huge advantage, and they really perfected some tactics of war that were extremely effective back in these days. And they were known for some big things. We're going to learn more about those as we learn more, we see these interactions with Assyria increasing in frequency. So verse 21, rest of Acts of Menahem, they're in the book, the Chronicles of Kings of Israel. Verse 22, Menahem slept with his fathers, and Pekaniah his son reigned in his stead. Now I hope you're looking at this going, man, there's a whole lot of stuff in these books of the Chronicles, the Kings of Israel and the Kings of Judah. There's a lot more in history that's happened that we don't know about. There's a ton more, and that'd be great to get those. We just don't have those yet that I know of. But again, is the Bible complete? No, it's not complete. There's so much, and this kind of stuff's mentioned all the time. So there's more for us that we can use to complement what we're learning in the Bible. It doesn't mean the Bible is bad. Do not take me wrong on that. It does not mean the Bible's bad. It means there's still more to be learned. That's important. Now, verse 22, Manasseh with the fathers, and Pekaniah, his son, reigned in his stead. I think I just read that. Verse 23, in the 50th year of Azariah, king of Judah, Pekaniah, the son of Menahem, began to reign over Israel in Samaria and reigned 2 years. So Pekaniah only made it 2 years, and that was it. Azariah has been around for a long time. He's been in the reign close to 50 years at this point, basically. Verse 24, and this is Pekahiah, he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. He departed not from the sins of Jeroboam, the sons of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. So status quo, idolatry, rampant wickedness, lots of corruption. There were wealthy people. You can tell that separation of class, wealth, and poor. Lots of challenges and things happening, basically, in Israel. They're not well blessed. There's classes. Again, there's poor, there's wealthy, there's distinguished people, there's not. There's lots of power struggles, secret combinations, sin of all kinds of problems are there, basically. Verse 25, but Pekah, the son of Remaliah, a captain of his, conspired against him and smote him in Samaria. This is probably why he only made it 2 years. And in the palace of the king's house with Argob and Ariah, and with him 50 men of the Gileadites, he killed him and reigned in his room. And verse 26, the rest of the acts of Pekahiah and all that he did, behold, they are written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. Now verse 27, in the 52nd year of Azariah, king of Judah, so this is 52 years in, remember, Pekahiah has just been ousted by a conspiracy, a coup. He says, Pekah, the son of Remaliah, began to reign over Israel in Samaria and reigned 20 years. So this is after him. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. He departed not from sins of the sons of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. So again, they're not repenting. They're not getting better. They're just following the same sin. So for them, this is just life. This is just normal. Okay, perspective is an important one to look at here because this is all they have known is this way of life. They haven't known anything different. So traditionally, they've spent hundreds and hundreds of years in idol worship. Yes, there's this great temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. Yes, there's the great worship of the God of Israel. There's these covenants. There's the law of Moses. And we kind of sort of follow it, but we really follow Baal. We've kind of patterned this worship of Baal, and we've distorted things. We've changed stuff. So all this has gone a whole different direction. But this is, for them, to us, this might sound like, oh my gosh, they're still sinning. They're still sinning. Yes. But to them, it's just life is normal. Okay, so just to keep a perspective on that, it's important to look at this because it kind of goes back to that question, does a fish know that it's swimming in water? Does a fish comprehend its environment that it's in? And it's different from the air that's outside the water. It's just a philosophical question. So this is the thing that we have that happens is when the sin becomes institutional, it becomes tradition, becomes normalized. We don't think of it as sin anymore. It's just normal life. We have to understand that the perspective a prophet would take is a very different perspective than what we think of. So we might think this is just life. This is just normal. This is just how it is. And the prophet's going, this is not how it's supposed to be. Let's change. So perspective is an important one. And that's kind of what's happening here is they're just keeping just that normal life as usual, not a big deal basically for them. It is really a big deal, but they don't see it that way. Now verse 29, in the days of Pekah, king of Israel, came Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria. Now there is a name we understand in history. Tiglath-Pileser. This is Tiglath-Pileser the third. Okay, this is the third, not the first one. And this is Assyria again. This is when Assyria is reaching their height. They're hitting up there. occupying. They've done so much of conquering in eastern Mesopotamia, even into northern Mesopotamia. They're coming now western Mesopotamia, doing more over here. We heard about them once in the last chapter. Now we're hearing them more here. Now we're getting into more real interactions with Assyria. This is important, okay? This is really important. We're getting into the 700s BC. Now, this is a good thing for us to understand because in the 700s BC, we know eventually Assyria is going to destroy Israel. And we also know that this is going to be time of another great prophet known as Isaiah. He comes in at the same time as well, prophesies some of these things. So that's the time frame we're dealing with right here, okay? So this is an important point. So in the days of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and took Ijon and Abel Beth Makkah and Genoa and Kedesh and Hazor and Gilead and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali, and carried them captive to Assyria. Verse 29 is a very important one for us to understand. Assyria is finally coming in, and they are occupying the cities of Israel. They are wiping them out, and they're taking them captive to Assyria. Now, this is important, okay, because this is the beginning of the scattering of Israel. This becomes a big problem for Israel in the moment. Remember, Jeroboam and Rehoboam split the kingdom, and all the idolatry that happened after that has led to this destruction of Israel. This is the scattering of Israel. This is an important verse to understand, a very important pivot point in history for Israel. Okay, they're carried captive to Assyria. So this is something that's important for us to look at. Now, one thing to understand about Tiglath-Pileser, he is not in line to be the king. There was an uprising in the 8th century, and he became the king. Just so you know, Tiglath-Pileser became king of Assyria, not because he was in the line, but because of a conspiracy, and they rose up in a coup, and he became the king, basically. So not unlike what's been happening even in Israel at this time. There's some similarities to how their kingdoms have been building up and doing things. But now they're carried away captive to Assyria. This is an important point. When two things that Assyria did that completely changed history. One is their mode of warfare. They used a massive land army. Massive land army. And as they kept occupying larger and larger areas, they kept getting bigger and bigger armies. Now, one thing that Assyria was good at as far as military tactics was what's known as siege warfare. What this means is they basically would take a city, they would surround the city. They would wipe out the resources around the outskirts of the city, cut down all the trees, poison the water holes, dam up the rivers and things like that. And so they would literally starve the resources of the city. Now, back then, if you haven't noticed, most cities had large walls around them. That was just a common strategy for them to have. It kept the invading armies out, and it kept wild animals out. Now, a lot of farmers would have their farms outside the city walls. They would go out and farm and do their stuff and then come back in. But inside the city walls, you'd have some farms, you'd have not a ton, but you have more of the city area where people lived, where commerce would happen. And then at night, they could block off those city gates, basically, and you couldn't get in, but there's a guard up on the top of the gate. Hey, what is your business here? Okay, let that guy in. So during the day, they just left the gates open for the most part. But at night, they would close them, and you had to get permission to get in, or otherwise you had to wait outside the city wall until the morning, then go in to do your business with the people. So it was a common, easy strategy for defense that they had used for centuries. So the problem is if you're an invading army, having a wall around the city is one of the first problems you run into. So what Assyria would do is they would actually siege the city, which means they would cut off the resources and surround the city and then wait. So the people in the city are left to basically eat only what they had stored in the city. When they ran out, they would starve and they would get weak. And then Assyria would walk into them basically because now they were too weak to fight Assyria back. So this was the common strategy that the nation of Assyria used to destroy countries and destroy people. And that's what they're doing here. They go into these cities. If there's no wall, they can just march it. They have such a large army that it's just crazy. They have big shields. They have their spears, swords. They march in and could just dominate because of their sheer volume of size, basically. The other thing that Assyria did, and this is an important point as well, is look at that last line, and carried them captive to Assyria. So what they would do is they would come in, Assyria would come in, and they would take the people and they would move them to other parts of the country, of the nation, and they would make them intermingle, and then they would basically make them follow Assyrian law and Assyrian religion. So they would take whatever identity you had, they would kind of strip you away from your old identity, they would make you Assyrian. So this is also where you might have, I don't know if you've ever noticed this or not, and I'd like to hear in the comments if you thought about this. This is also where the word assimilate comes from. Assimilate, especially for Trekkie fans, you've heard that a lot with the Borg. Assimilate is to take something that's different and make it the same as you, basically. Assyria would basically assimilate other nations and make them one type of culture. So they took one type of culture and they forced it on everybody, basically. So they would get rid of religions, they would get rid of everything else, force themselves out. That changed culturally how things happened. That changed a lot of stuff. A lot of traditions that happened before Assyria came through were being destroyed as Assyria moved through the area. So a lot of ancient stuff went away about this around this time frame of the Neo-Assyrian Empire because of this. At least by the time the Neo-Assyrian Empire came around. So this is what they did with Israel. They took Israelites who were worshiping Baal and Ashtaroth and others, but were still Israelites, had the law of Moses, had those principles, moved them into Assyria, and then made them Assyrians, blended them in. So we don't know where they went. This is that scattering. They got lost in the nation, and they got scattered all over the place. And they were made Assyrians, and so they weren't worshiping God, the real God. They weren't doing all the things they were supposed to, which they weren't really doing anyways. But they became Assyrians, and they were worshiping the Assyrian gods, which was, I believe, Enlil was one of those ones. I think I sometimes get those mixed up with the Akkadian nations, which were pre-Assyrian. But there's, I think, like Enlil and a couple of other ones were some of them. Marduk was one of the common gods back then as well. So that's what they did. So this is the scattering of Israel. 2 Kings 15:29. The scattering of Israel is right there. So, and Tiglath-Pileser III is the one that did this, basically. So you can kind of put all this together when you're studying your history. Now, verse 30. Let's continue on. Hoshea, the son of Elah, made a conspiracy against Pekah, the son of Remaliah, and smote him and slew him and reigned in his stead in the 20th year of Jotham, the son of Uzziah. The rest of acts of Pekah and all that he did, behold, are not written in the books of the Chronicles of Kings of Israel. So this has happened. Now, not all of Israel is gone yet, but it's started. And Assyria is going to continue to come back and take more until all that's left is Jerusalem. And they siege Jerusalem, but they can't get it to work. So Jerusalem gets spared. Basically, Judah stays, but everybody else gets scattered. So we're going to get into all the rest of that here in these next few chapters. It's going to be great. So verse 32, in the second year of Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, began Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, to reign. So now we just talked about some things happening in Israel. Now we're kind of going back in time just a little bit to talk about the beginning of the reign of Uzziah. Or Jotham, the son of Uzziah. Verse 33, 5 and 20 years old was he when he began to reign. He reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jerusha, the daughter of Zadok. He did that which was right in the sight of the Lord. He did according to all that his father Uzziah had done. So Israel is still wicked. Judah has started to become more righteous. Basically, the kings are helping them. It's amazing. I think this is something that's really great to look at. It's amazing to think of this, how whether the king was wicked or not made such a difference in whether the people were wicked or not. And this really goes back to what King Mosiah in the Book of Mormon talks about when he has no sons who are willing to take the kingship. And he tells the people, hey, I'm not going to force any of my sons to become the king. If they don't want to be king, that's okay. We're going to change to a law of judges, a system of judges, because it's better to have a distributed system rather than have a monarchy that goes bad. A monarchy that goes bad is absolutely one of the worst types of governments you could have. And this is a good example, because a wicked king causes the people to become wicked. A righteous king causes people to become righteous. So it's fascinating how that works out. And we're seeing that in these chapters. So, verse 35, howbeit the high places were not removed. The people sacrificed and burned incense still in the high places. He built the higher gate of the house of the Lord. So he builds up the house of the Lord a little bit more, a little bit higher gate, probably more protection for the temple, but he doesn't get rid of the idol worship, basically. Verse 36, now the rest of the acts of Jotham, all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? In those days, the Lord began to send against Judah Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah. And Jotham slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David, his father, and Ahaz, his son, reigned in his stead. So there's a little bit of tidbit there in that second to last verse, that during these days, Judah and Israel started to have Syria. So Assyria is this big, mighty empire that came in and took a bunch of the cities over. Now the little country of Syria is coming in to do some damage as well. So let's jump into the next chapter to continue on this story.